Everyone's chasing virality. More views, more likes, more ads. But here's the uncomfortable truth. None of that builds the one thing that actually drives sales: trust. And without trust, your content is basically a billboard in the desert. It looks good, but no one's really buying. And here's the thing. This isn't random. There's actually a formula how trust works, one most businesses ignore. It's called the Google 7-11-4 rule. It explains why your ads aren't converting, why your content feels like it's going nowhere, and why some brands effortlessly build loyal customers while others burn out. And in this video, I'll break down exactly how it works and how you can use it to grow your brand or business. Hey, I'm Akash Damodaran, founder of Unimedia, and for the past 4 years, my team and I have helped brands like Google, Intuit, Waterade, and Sennheiser, plus over 15 personal brands at the 6- and 7-figure level, basically turning their content into predictable revenue engines. Not by chasing viral spikes, but by systematically building trust with their audience. For instance, Sennheiser came to us with 2 new products they wanted to push hard. Now, we could have gone the spray and pray route, quick ads, trend chasing videos, and short-term hype. But instead, we built a content strategy that focused on trust over time, basically educating their audience, showing use cases, and weaving in storytelling where we constantly showcase the product. The result, those campaigns didn't just hit their sales targets, they blew past them. And it wasn't because we hacked the algorithm, it was because we earned their audience's trust. And it all comes down to this rule. But before we dive into how this rule works, I put together something that'll help you apply it right away. It's called the Media Machine Starter Pack. It's a free 30-day content calendar and engine blueprint that shows you how to build the kind of trust Google's 7-11-4 rule is talking about. Just comment starter below and I'll send it over. Alright, with that out of the way, let's jump right in. Okay, let's start off by talking about why trust is the real currency. So the entire foundation of this rule relies on trust, and that's why we were talking about trust being the real currency. But before we get into what the rule really talks about, we need to talk about the different mediums and platforms in the different forms. In today's landscape, we basically have a lot of noise, a lot of AI gimmicks, and a lot of over promises. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen that, right? Just today, I came across at least 3 or 4 reels where they were talking about the different hooks that they can use to basically hack the audience's attention. Now, you don't want to kind of be in the game of hacking. What you want to do is kind of figure out a systematic and a strategic way that you can gain your audience's trust, and in that process sell to them. Because fundamentally, at the core of it, every single business is looking to basically sell something in some form or the other. And media at the end of the day is just another conduit, another form, and in this case, marketing. With the kind of content that we see out there, with a lot of noise, a lot of AI gimmicks, we see content being created trying to just spray and pray. But I think the thing that's going to really set you apart is basically trust. It's about knowing how you can trust the product or the business or the person or the personal brand that you're spending time with online. And that kind of relates or translates into, you just spending time with someone in person. It really comes down to that. Because think about it, right? Fundamentally, we buy from someone who we trust. Or we might trust someone with something only because we have spent that much time with them. At the end of the day, media or videos is just another way to make that happen. And so the point I'm trying to make is that you basically trust someone because you've spent a lot of time with them, which is basically a combination of consistency and time spent, which equals to familiarity. And so the more familiar you are with a brand or the product or the business or the person, the more you trust the person, and the more you trust the person, chances are that they'll actually be willing to buy into whatever it is you're planning to sell. And so, like I said, media works the same way. It lets people know your values, your style, even your flaws. There are 3 things when it comes to really buying from someone. It's about thinking about what is the pain point that they can help alleviate. It's about thinking what is the unique proposition or what's the USP that they bring to the table that can actually benefit me. And third is just the PR of the person or the brand itself. Once you have all 3 checked off, it becomes fairly straightforward for the brand or the product to really make a sale. Just like how compounding works with showing up consistently over and over again, it's the same thing here as well. So trust compounds as well, and every single minute spent with you increases the chance of conversion. So the longer you can spend time with the product or the business or the person, the chances of them buying from you are so much higher. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's actually move on to the next part, and which is basically talking about the different mediums and platforms and different ways we can actually gain someone's trust. And so the first one I want to talk about is the most popular media form, which is short form content. And I think this is something that a lot of leaders obsess over, and even a lot of my clients, they reach out to us because they've come across some of their competitors, promoting their product on short form content. It really only translates into surface level attention. Like, think about it. There's never been a time where you would scroll through your Instagram feed or your TikTok feed, come across a video and be convinced of a product because you just spent like 45 seconds with them. It never happens. And so it's almost like a gateway to building trust with a brand or a company or a business. So it's good for you to kind of be omnipresent in terms of having your presence on all these different platforms. But is it solely a good indicator or a good mechanism for you to convert someone and actually win someone's trust over? I don't think so. Short form content is basically like speed dating, right? They're like fast impressions, but it's all just shallow connections. So an analogy I like to keep bringing up with my clients is that each tweet is basically like a cool idea, and it's like, okay, that's great. But for you to really know and even buy into the person who's tweeted, you need to see at least like 100, 200 tweets regularly and consistently from that person. And even then, you still don't know what the person looks or feels like and what they really believe in. And again, I'm talking more from a personal brand perspective, but all of these are also applicable for companies, businesses, and brands as well. And so we look at how tweets or even short form content is consumed. You look at it, oh, it's a cool idea, and that's that, right? And then they basically decide to scroll away. But if you look at something like a book, which is on the other end of the spectrum, you're basically spending 7 hours with the author. Now, it doesn't mean that you're actually seeing the author, but you're actually spending a lot of time with their beliefs, their mechanisms, the way they operate. And so by the time you're done with a book, and if the book is really good and it has substance, then chances are you're bought into what the author has to say. So tomorrow when you actually see the author or you come across the author, you're already kind of won over. And that's because you spent like 7, 8, 9 hours reading and being consumed by the book. And so what I like to do is kind of think of this whole thing as a spectrum, right? And I think we can come to this a little later too. Imagine there's a line for attention. If you have someone reading your book or let's say your newsletter, chances are that they are spending quality attention with you and they're spending a lot more of their time with you, which means that the chances to actually convert into a sale is much, much higher towards this end. Then we have something like YouTube videos. And before that, we have things like, a short form video. Then we have even written posts, and then we have a tweet or an X or whatever it's called now. And so you can see in this so-called attention spectrum, this becomes almost like a gateway. It's a good way for you to start honing someone's attention, and then through the course of spending more and more time through short form content, it's a great place for us to upsell them to long form, upsell them to newsletter, and upsell them to a sale to eventually. But converting them directly from short form into a sale is almost unheard of, unless you actually think about how a lot of the different businesses and brands operate, which is they throw so many dollars, like millions of dollars, in terms of publishing great content, but also promoting the shit out of each one of these pieces. And so what ends up happening is that becomes a slippery slope in itself. And so brands are required to spend more and more and more money to ensure that their products or businesses or services are top of mind for their ideal customer. But if you actually think about a strategic way to approach this and you start honing their attention from these gateway pieces that's mentioned here, and then eventually get them to a point where they start spending time with you on YouTube videos or newsletters or books, then you're kind of funneling them, and that is actually the proper way to funnel someone into your ecosystem. And so coming back to what I was saying, short form definitely has a role. It's basically a gateway, but it doesn't build depth, which means that it's a good conduit to channel someone in. It's a good place for you to find your ideal customer and maybe get them to be aware of you. But in terms of really converting, you need them to get onto any of these spaces that I mentioned earlier. All right, so this is actually a good segue into why I think YouTube is basically the god of all platforms, or if you had to pick one particular platform to triple down on, I would say YouTube is definitely the one. Now think about it, right? There's not a single other long form platform where you have great reach and you also have great discovery. And the best part is it's completely free. It's almost like you have an algorithm or a person at your disposal going around looking for your ideal customer audience or your ideal customer persona or your ideal audience segment. And so it's your job to paint a clear picture for the algorithm so that it can start working on your behalf. I actually went into a lot of details in one of our previous videos where we spoke about the importance of not trying to hack the algorithm, but more important to like train it over the long run. So check it out when you get the time. And so if you think about it, YouTube actually brings the perfect mix of both depth and discovery. And so there's very little, or I would even say no platform that exists that has this level of depth, which is basically time spent, because one long form video, anywhere between 10 to 20 or 30 minutes, however long this video is going to be, is not just 10, 20 or 30 times more effective than a short form video. And I think if I'm not wrong, I think it was Seth Godin who said a long form video that's 10 minutes long is not 10x more valuable or impactful than a 1 minute short form video, but it's almost like exponentially more effective. It's almost like 100 or 200 or 1000x more impactful, because you're really spending quality time with the person and you're spending quality time with the brand. And it might seem like this is more so for people, yes, but think about even some of the bigger brands that you know, right? Like let's take Apple for instance. There's a reason why we know Tim Cook, and there's a reason why Tim Cook actually has a bigger following than Apple itself. There's a reason why not just Tim Cook, we know people like Johnny Ive, we know Craig Federighi, and it's because we've spent time with them during these conferences and these reveals or unveils or whatever you want to call it, these annual reveals that they have. That's just a smart way for a brand to use someone within the brand or within the company to be the face of the brand or the company. And so everything I'm talking about here not just applies to individuals or personal brands, but it also applies to businesses as well. And so yeah, coming back to this, I believe there are very few platforms, or like I said, no platform actually that has this perfect mix of depth and discovery. To be honest, we practice what we preach. And that's why we're actually creating content here. Like this whole part about Unimedia itself becoming into a multi-six-figure company was because we actually started with a podcast that we were publishing not just on all the podcasting platforms as through the audio format, but we also made a video form for the podcast and we published it on YouTube, which meant that the opportunity to be discovered was far exponentially higher than just relying on platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And so that's what's actually helped us grow to this stage. We actually didn't even spend too much time in the initial days on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. Actually, we weren't even on TikTok at all, and instead focused deliberately on long form content entirely. And so that actually helped build depth with the right audience. And so that's crucial. And this all goes back to the same trust piece that I mentioned earlier, because if they don't spend time with you, the whole thing is moot. And an example I can give you from what we did in our initial days when we just had a podcast was all the clients that reached out, they already knew what I and an extension what the media house kind of stood for. So they knew the kind of consistency with which we were publishing our own original production. And so it was so much easier for us to get into the weeds and the nitty-gritty of what they wanted, instead of them having to kind of break the ice, get to know more about us, because they had already spent quite a few hours consuming some of our previous videos. And so the biggest takeaway here is that if you had to just pick one platform out of the lot, I would say you need to pick YouTube. And this is, I think, a mistake that a lot of personal brands are making, where they only spend time creating content on Instagram and TikTok, completely ignoring the benefit of what you can do with a platform like YouTube. But like I said, the biggest takeaway here is that if you had to pick one platform, you should definitely pick YouTube, and YouTube needs to be almost like the backbone of your content strategy. And if you're wondering, with all of these different platforms, I spoke about short form content a while ago, then I spoke about the fact that you need to be on YouTube, and you're thinking, how do you actually map this all out without spending hours? Because it really does take some time and it takes a toll on you. And that's exactly why I created the Media Machine Starter Pack. It basically gives you a plug and play system to take one idea and expand it across newsletters, YouTube posts, shorts, basically across all these different platforms with just that one core idea, all while building trust the way we've been talking about today. Comment starter down below and I'll send it your way. But before we get into the rule, let's actually talk about the entire funnel. And so how do we actually convert someone's attention from these different platforms and get them onto this? Because trust me, one part of that rule is really talking about these different mediums or platforms. All right, so let's actually move on to the next piece, where it kind of touches on the whole attention span piece I drew earlier. It's about thinking, how do we take gateway attention and then turn it into depth? And then not just that, you actually own their attention or have an owned audience. Because think about it, all of us rely heavily on the algorithms on these platforms, right? Which basically means that we don't own the audience. For instance, if tomorrow TikTok decides to shut down, which actually happened in India when I was in India, you lose your entire audience base. And there's no way for you to kind of reclaim that or capitalize on that. And so the only actual medium you can tap into and the only actual medium you can really focus on is the newsletter piece. And so that's what I mean by owned funnel flow. And so it's basically taking people from, low friction gateway platforms like Instagram, Reddit, TikTok, and then thinking about how we can kind of put them into a platform like YouTube, which is longer form, builds even more trust and there's more depth. And then from YouTube, how do we take them to something like a newsletter? That is the most, like the highest form of trust, but also it's basically a platform that's owned by you. For instance, no one can take away your entire email list or your list of subscribers there. And secondly, another big benefit of doing this is it's not really dependent on an algorithm. Like with your content, you're relying heavily on an algorithm to showcase your content or surface your content on these different platforms or different mediums, if you will. Like their feeds, there are these suggestions and recommendations and whatnot. But with the newsletter, once you have an email sent out and they receive it, yes, it's based on them, opening the email or not, but you definitely get your content in front of your audience or your ideal audience member, or in this case, someone who's a subscriber. Now, if you look at how this progresses, you will have to look at it as different stages. And so with each stage, there's more focused attention. And with more focused attention, there's like more time spent with you. And when I say more time spent with you, it goes back to what we started this conversation off with, which is higher trust. And if there's higher trust, you have far stronger odds of conversion. And so the thing to really take away here is that attention quality improves as you move platforms. And so there's a time and place and almost like a flow of how you want to operate on these different platforms. The last thing you want to do is just pray and pray, like I said. So if you have a solid strategy of how you go from getting someone or introducing your brand to someone on a particular platform like short form content, and then getting them onto YouTube, and then getting them onto your newsletter, and then eventually selling something, whatever it is you plan to sell on the newsletter, chances of conversion are so much higher for the same reason I mentioned earlier. It's all in stages. Yeah, so this actually leads into another big benefit of publishing content and how you can use content strategy to your benefit. Is basically media is a scalable proxy for manual work. And by that I mean, there are thousands of dollars spent for sales teams or for individuals to, get to know a client or a company, and so they're spending millions and hours as well on icebreakers, intro calls, and explaining their processes, value, and positioning. So it goes back to that example I mentioned earlier. Because some of our clients had spent time with us on our content, they knew our vision, they knew the kind of values and how we operated. So a lot of those things we didn't even have to talk about. It was fairly straightforward. Even in this video, right? Like you can see, like that's what I mentioned at the end as well. This is exactly why Uni produces these videos. It's to actually nurture and educate before we, get on a call. Because, what we are doing is we're kind of replacing a lot of those steps, right? Even the way we reach out to some of our ideal prospects or leads as well is we don't try to book time with them right away. What we end up doing is we share some of these videos with them and say, hey, look at some of the kind of topics that we've spoken about. You'll find it interesting and refreshing to see that we're one of the only few media agencies out there that talk about not going viral and instead focusing a lot more on your audience of one or your market of one. What we do is we share a lot of our content, and in this case our audience, which is our clients, they already know our values, approach, and proof before we get into a meeting. And by the time they book, they're already kind of warmed up and pre-educated, and they really trust you. And like I said, chances of things converting are so much higher when they trust you. And that's something we practice here. The reason why I thought I'll mention this is because the whole case around trust also translates into sales calls and actually finally making a sale in any part of the funnel. And so media becomes a very obvious scalable proxy for manual work. And that's why we have zero gatekeeping when it comes to all of these different topics. We decide to give away a lot of that value for free on our YouTube channel, because even though we give it away for free, there's still a whole lot of work that it takes for you to run the ship, for you to have operations running buttery smooth. That's exactly what we do for our clients, right? We basically replace those repetitive sales calls, icebreakers, and pitch decks with content that pre-sells and builds trust before they even meet their client or their customer. And so by the time someone books time with them, they already knew their value. If you're a business or the brand and you'd like to set this system up for yourself, then check out the link below, because we're actually offering a $500 credit when you skip the call and start today. If you directly decide to make the payment and skip the call, you get $500 back in the first month. Check out the link in the description if you're interested. So the Google 7-11-4 rule or formula states that for anyone to buy from you, they need to have spent at least 7 hours with you, over 11 touch points across 4 different platforms. What do these individual terms mean? So 7 hours is fairly straightforward. They should have spent 7 hours with you, which if you go back to the whole attention spectrum, you'll now realize that for you to spend 7 hours with someone over short form content or written posts is really very difficult. Like, you'll have to spend or create a lot of content for them to spend or kind of check this box off. Not just that, it should have been 11 times that the content was served, and so that becomes your 11 touch points, which is fairly possible with short form content or any content for that matter. But one thing that's interesting that came out of this rule is the whole different platforms. So with physical brick and mortar stores or physical products, you can think about it as just different mediums where you see advertising or just the name or the branding being called out. So it could be something along the lines of seeing a billboard and you see a brand, and then you see, a brand on someone's jersey, and those are all just different mediums or different platforms. And for content, different platforms would basically mean digital platforms, and so different platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, all of these are different platforms. And so the more you can kind of get them to spend time with you on different platforms, and they've spent at least 7 hours with you, your odds of someone or the chances of someone buying from you are so much more exponentially higher. This isn't a hard law, it's basically only a guideline. It's almost like a good milestone or an indicator to tell you whether you're trending in the right direction or not. Like I mentioned here, it's basically a checkpoint to see if you're trending right. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier, right? Like, there's never been an instance where you're scrolling through Instagram, you see something, and then you decide to buy right away. Like, chances are you might dabble, you might kind of explore, but usually it's when you have spent more time, you've done your research, or maybe, just consume more content from that person or that brand or that business, is when you actually realize, okay, this is worth my time, and that converts into, dollars or revenue for the brand. And so you see the brand across different platforms multiple times, that builds familiarity, that ties into trust, and finally, that results in conversion or sale. So that's basically what the 7-11-4 rule states, and it's something that a lot of people ignore. They're more focused on just churning or pushing content out, not thinking about how they're catering to their ideal customer persona or their ideal audience segment. But if you got your backbone or your strategy on point, then all of this kind of adds or multiplies or compounds. And so the way you need to look at this is, how can you utilize all these different platforms to your benefit, and how can that translate into sales? And in a world filled with AI and generic content or generic products and services, if you have something that really stands out and you're able to convince someone and get them to spend time with you, odds of success or odds of converting them and making a sale out of that is going to be so much higher. This finally brings me to the big takeaway here. Growth does not necessarily mean more ads, and that definitely doesn't mean just random posts. It really comes down to how you build that funnel for your brand. Like I said, you need to really think about engineering trust, and so that's where real growth lies. If you can really think through how you can take someone's attention, convert that into trust across these different platforms. And all of this, we believe at Unimedia that YouTube really needs to be your long form backbone. If you don't have a platform like YouTube, chances of you getting your ideal customer to spend time with you drops drastically. And like I mentioned earlier, it's about thinking about different platforms as gateway attention or gateway trust mediums, then getting them to spend time with you, which actually takes you through the depth piece, and then finally getting them onto something like a newsletter where you have your own audience progression. And so to summarize, if you get them to spend enough time with you, you think through all of these different touch points like I mentioned, and also think through the different platforms, then when you actually do this the right way, you're then kind of leveraging not just one algorithm on these different platforms individually, but you're kind of thinking about how all of them kind of cohesively work together for you, and then eventually you're funneling them into your ecosystem. They get to spend more time with you, and then, like I mentioned earlier, with trust comes a lot more sales. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. To make this super practical, don't leave without grabbing the free Media Machine Starter Pack. It's a 30-day content engine blueprint we use with clients to turn ideas into trust-building content. It can get very overwhelming if you start thinking about 100 different ideas and then coming up with 100 different content pieces across different platforms. And so we have kind of come up with an approach to really streamline all of that. So if you want to get started with that, comment starter and I'll send it over right now. And if you don't want to spend months figuring this out for yourself, that's exactly why we exist. That's why Unimedia exists. We handle it all end to end, from content strategy to production to recording to editing to publishing. And currently we've got just 2 more client spots open for the coming quarter. And if you skip the call and sign up right away, we'll credit $500 back on your first month. You heard that right. $500 back on your first month. But if you prefer to get on a call first before you make up your mind, that's fine too, because I get it. Some people like it that way. Either ways, both links are below, either to start immediately or to book a call with our team. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.